So in this video, I have a very important update in a major case against a statewide ban on the possession of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds and also the mandatory permit that that state put in place. So let's break down what is happening in this critical challenge. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to thank one of the main supporters and sponsors of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, just don't settle for any company. In my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they can help you in self-defense incidents that maybe other companies cannot. So I highly recommend signing up this year using the links down below. You'll lock in your price if you sign up this year, and you can use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, and you can get $50 off an individual sign-up plan or $25 off of a family plan. In this video, we're going to be discussing a challenge against a state magazine ban and also the permit to purchase that they put in place in that state. In this video, we're gonna be talking about Oregon Measure 114 and the critical lawsuit that is now moving forward to stop that restriction. Oregon Measure 114, which was put in place in the state, created a statewide permit to purchase firearms and also a magazine ban, and that was ruled unconstitutional and struck down in its entirety by a state court judge. That state court judge in the case issued a permanent injunction against that measure. The state of Oregon, of course, in response, attempted to remove that permanent injunction through the appeals process. Of course, they wanted to protect their violations of the Second Amendment. Well, recently, that Oregon Court of Appeals issued a unanimous order upholding the magazine ban and the permit process. That ruling, went against the permanent injunction, but this case is now far from over. Recently, we received a notice from the Oregon State Supreme Court that they granted review to this case, and now that Supreme Court has set oral arguments to take place on this issue, and that's going to happen on November 11th. So just in a couple months, this critical magazine ban and permit case is heading to oral arguments in that state Supreme Court. Now, this case we're talking about and focusing on in this video is called Arnold versus Kotek. This case challenges Measure 114 as a violation of the Oregon State Constitution. Measure 114 first requires that anyone purchasing a gun must obtain a permit to purchase. The second significant thing that it did is it created a restriction on the sale, purchase, and transfer and possession of any magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. And that happens after the effective date of that measure. In response to Measure 114, the Arnold versus Kotek case was filed in a state court, and on review, a state court judge, Judge Robert Raccio, ruled in the favor of the plaintiff here, striking down the Oregon Measure 114 as invalid under the state's constitution. It's important for me to note that since this is a state challenge, it's kind of under the laws of the Oregon State Constitution. There is a different standard for a state court to determine the constitutionality of a state law and whether it violates, that state constitution when it comes to firearms. Under this standard, Oregon applies kind of a two-phase test. Under Phase 1, there is a determination of whether Article 1, Section 27 of the state constitution even applies. Under the first phase, Oregon argues that Article 1, Section 27 does not apply since they believe magazines are not arms and are not protected by the Constitution. Now, the second phase of the test is almost looking at the public's interest and balancing the claimed purpose with the potential of undue burden, aka what impacts, are there on the constitutional right to purchase these items and potentially possess them, and is that outweighed by the harms to the public? Of course, Oregon in their Measure 114 argues that the measure is in the public's best interest to stop crime. However, the trial court on review found that through expert testimony and data that was submitted, the public harms that are being argued by the state of Oregon were essentially just completely overblown. The measure does not actually meet any of those claimed interests, and therefore it does not outweigh the constitutional violation. This case eventually made its way to the Court of Appeals, who recently decided to side with the state of Oregon and strike down Judge Raccio's permanent injunction, but that is currently on hold, and now this is moving its way to the state Supreme Court. In the opinion of the Court of Appeals, they stated that from the foregoing, the question we must address in this case is whether the enacting body here, the people of Oregon, enacted a reasonable regulation governing the possession and use of constitutionally protected arms in order to promote public safety without unduly frustrating the right to armed self-defense. In essence, all the court believed that matters in this case are whether there is a claimed public safety threat and public safety benefit created by the regulation, and that it is constitutional in some of its applications, so it's constitutional in some way. And if it is, then they say that they can do this in the state of Oregon. Now, when it came to the permit side, they stated that the permit to purchase program and the point of transfer background check that's put in place reflect a contemporary legislative response to identifiable threats to public safety and a legislative determination that the risk of death or serious injury to members of the public is increased by the threat posed by untrained and dangerous persons obtaining firearms. Therefore, they upheld the permit process as constitutional. Now, on review of the magazine ban, they stated that we also observed that the magazine ban is a contemporary legislative response to identifiable public safety concerns stemming from the advancements in technology and the availability of those advancements to the public that have created observable threats to public safety. But that decision by the Court of Appeals, upholding the permit process and upholding the magazine ban is now up for review. It's gone to the Oregon State Supreme Court. They have granted review to this case, and now they have set it for oral arguments. Currently, the oral arguments in this case are set to take place on November 11th. Now, the plaintiff here, the Arnold plaintiff, submitted his opening brief, and he argues that consistent case law holds that constitutional restrictions on arms must have pre-1859 historical analogs, demonstrating that Oregon's constitutional drafters understood these types of laws were constitutional. Rather than analyzing history or applying earlier holdings, the opinion of the Court of Appeals adopted a subjective reasonability test foreign to case law and devoid of objective criteria. The opinion concluded that the Measure 114 is reasonable because it does not ban all firearms and eventually allows Oregon residents to obtain firearms. Under the correct analysis, they state, no Measure 114 provision is remotely analogous to any law upheld pre-1859. Moreover, because the opinion held that so defined LCMs are constitutionally protected arms, the opinion should have adhered to the doctrine of stare decisis and held that Section 11 is unconstitutional. So this is great news coming out of the state of Oregon. The state Supreme Court will now consider whether this state ban on magazines and the permit to purchase simply any gun is constitutional or whether it violates the state constitution. I will note that the Oregon State Supreme Court does lean left, but regardless, this sets up a major state magazine ban and permit challenge all wrapped kind of into one case that eventually probably will make its way to the United States Supreme Court. The best case scenario, of course, would be for the Oregon Supreme Court here to find that Measure 114 is unconstitutional, and then after that, force the state of Oregon to seek Supreme Court review and have them address these critical issues. However, that kind of might be a long shot, but I will note that the Oregon State Supreme Court has kind of had a hands-off approach when it comes to this case, when it comes to the magazine ban and the permit process with Measure 114. Multiple times the state of Oregon has tried to get the Oregon State Supreme Court to step in early on this case, but every time the Supreme Court there has denied that. So maybe that is an indication that they do not agree with what the state did with Measure 114. But regardless, now this is heading to oral arguments, and it's going to be in front of the Supreme Court on November 11th at 9 a.m. It's going to be interesting to kind of hear those arguments and see, how do the judges on the Oregon State Supreme Court lean. You can kind of gather a lot based on the questions that they ask and some hypotheticals. So we'll have a better idea about how they're leaning on this issue after those oral arguments. So that's what's happening currently in this critical magazine ban and permit to purchase case that has now made its way to the state Supreme Court. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to subscribe to the channel. Also, you can check out my website, armedscholar.com. Over there, we have a lot for you guys. Channel merch, some deals and coupons, and also you can get the free legal guide that we have available for you. All you have to do is put in your email and we send you over a PDF, and then you get some follow-up emails as well with additional free educational information and some deals and daily deals and things like that to save you some money. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support, and never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.